district in the state to offer free period products to all students who need them. So I'm very proud of that. Thank you for inviting me to be part of this panel this morning. To kick things off, let's just go down the table. Please introduce yourself and then let us know what space you're in.
I'm Sarah Cole, and I wear a lot of hats. So. I'm adjunct faculty at UCO and teach their sex through the lifespan. And I'm adjunct professor at University of Illinois virtually. I teach human sexuality there. I've always worked in public health to some degree. And I've been teaching sexuality classes for 23 years now. I was full-time faculty at UCO, but resigned, it's been like 8 years ago now. I keep looking at Lindsay because we worked together there. It's been 8 years now, which has freed up my time to do a lot of cool community-based work. So, you know, Teen Empower. I've been working with Teen Empower for the last decade. I have revised some of their curricula, so they're going into, especially middle schools, and others in middle and high schools, and teaching comprehensive sex education. And I know they're big in working with you on getting access to menstrual products in the schools. I've been working with Remerge of Central Oklahoma for the last 8 years since I left UCO full-time. And so that's a diversion program for females who have drug-related charges to keep them out of our prison system, reunify them with their children. And so we just had a graduation last week, and the females who graduated from that program collectively were facing 55 years in prison. So they've avoided that. I teach, they call it women's wellness. It's basically sex education for adults because we're the only state that lacks health education mandates. We do finally have those, but it omits human growth and development. So things will not get better anytime soon, even when those health ed mandates kick in this fall. And I've started working with Palomar, so people who are survivors of domestic violence, sex trafficking, prostitution, etc. And I teach an empowerment class for them, which again is sort of going back to the basics of sex education, which includes, and I focus heavily on body autonomy, positive, enthusiastic, freely given, verbal consent, and everything that I teach is scientifically and medically accurate, inclusive, trauma-informed, etc. So lots of fun little things, and then my husband and I do some, my husband's from Liberia, and we're doing some work over there with distributing menstrual cups to combat period poverty there.
That's awesome. So I'm so happy to see all of you here today and to be on this panel with all these awesome individuals. My name is Lindsay Churchill. I'm a professor of history at the University of Central Oklahoma. I'm also the director of the Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies program, the only sexuality studies major in the state of Oklahoma. So come learn with us. I'm also the director of the Women's Research Center and VGLTQ+ Student Center on UCO's campus. We are the only standalone LGBTQIA+ center at a college or university in the state of Oklahoma. So come visit us. Who's visited us before? Anybody? Okay, yay. Okay, you're all welcome, and I hope you come and see us. We're also responsible for all the sexual health programming on our campus, along with providing a safe space, a community closet, and this is to add to your list of services. So starting in 2019, we began to provide free condoms, lube, pads, tampons, and then more recently pregnancy tests. And people come from all around the community to get these items. How many condoms do you think we give out every semester? Yes. So throw out a guess.
2,000, 3,000.
Oh, when you do 20,000, now this is gonna sound sad, but about 7 to 8,000 per semester, and then around 2,000 period products per semester. All of these things are donated to us, or we get from the Oklahoma State Health Department. And then the pregnancy testing has gotten interesting too, with everything going on. Now we actually, by law, just have to hand them a pregnancy test and say, don't tell us the results. Because we used to do pregnancy referral training for our staff and our student researchers, and we cannot do that anymore because we can't give them 3 different options that we used to. So that's been an interesting thing as well. Another thing we do at our center is research, and we have researched issues regarding menstruation, and one of those things we've done is we have done a survey of women from Remerge about their experiences with pads in prison, which I can talk about a little bit later if you want. So I'm happy to be here, and I'll pass it along.
Oh, there's one more thing I forgot.
Yeah. So we also worked with our student government to get 40 pad and tampon machines throughout campus for free. So if you are in gender neutral or women's restrooms in most buildings on campus, you can get free period products. So that has been also another issue as well, to get those stocked and restocked. But that's another thing we're really proud that our students were able to do.
I feel a little bit unqualified at some level to be up in this panel. I was very pleased when Kristen asked me to join. A little background on myself: I'm Dr. Lisa Moon. I'm a pediatric and adolescent gynecologist, which is a very small subspecialty field in gynecology, where, you know, my job is all day, every day. I talk to girls about their periods, basically, and all of the you know, things that go wrong with a period, and kind of how to manage them, and kind of restore their quality of life, so that they're able to participate in school and their usual activities and just live their lives as teenagers and adolescents. So I think my background is a little bit different than I think a lot of the people here, but I'm very excited to be able to participate and answer any questions kind of from the medical side of things, if you will. And yeah, just really excited.
Hi everyone, my name is Lacey Giroux, and I'm the manager of state policy at the Alliance for Period Supplies, which is a national nonprofit. It's a program of the National Diaper Bank Network. So with both organizations, we work with more than 300 basic needs banks across the country, who work in their individual communities. PeriodOKC is our member here in Oklahoma City. So they work in their individual communities to ensure that all people have their basic needs met. So whether it's diapers, adult incontinence products, or period supplies, they're working in their communities to make sure that everyone has those basic necessities they need to thrive. My background before I came to this work was I was working for a health department. My background's in public health. So I was working for a health department. It's funny, we were talking about, I was working a lot on breastfeeding accommodations work, but I also worked on bills related to maternal mortality. And I got put on this one bill, and I'm like, what the heck is this? And it was a tax exemption for diapers and period supplies. And that was the first time I actually got introduced this issue. I saw the Netflix documentary years back about you know, what was going on in India. And I knew that was a problem there, but I never thought about what was happening here in the US. And so that was my first time seeing that. And so I worked with the National Diaper Bank Network actually on that piece of legislation. But my question back to them was, is this it? Is this the solution? Because what we know is that exempting something from sales tax is gonna help some people, but it's gonna help everybody. And it might not actually get to the roots of the problem. In fact, it's not gonna get to the roots of the problem, because people who struggle with period poverty, those 10 cents that they're gonna save from that sales tax exemption isn't going to help them get that box. It might help a few people here and there, but it's not the solution. So I wanted to know more, and when I saw a job got posted, I was like, yes, this is the work that I wanna do. I wanna help, and I wanna focus on access. So as a national organization, we do focus our work, and my role is strictly on legislation. I know that when we were talking about ordering products and things like that, I don't know anything about that, but I do know about legislation. And so My role is to work on access legislation, and we do work on the sales tax to exempt both period products and diapers and adult incontinence products from sales tax still, but our issue really is now focused on access, ensuring that products are available in schools, prisons, public buildings, everywhere, so that every individual who needs those products has them and is able to thrive, to get to work, to get to school. And so that's why I'm here. I get paid to be here, but I have a passion for this work, and I'm really excited to be with you all today.
House back down.
Thank you guys. So to kick things off, since I got involved in this space of period poverty and menstruation, there's a lot of misconceptions. There's a lot of really funny things that people assume and ask questions about. So what I'd like for you to do is I want you to talk about 1 to 2 misconceptions that are directly in your area of expertise.
So I think that oftentimes people hear period poverty, 1, they have no idea what it is, and 2, they believe that it's just simply lack of access to products. And for me, it's much broader than that. It's the shame and stigma around menstruation, and it's a lack of education. I already mentioned about the state of Oklahoma and how poorly we're serving our youth, and that they're not getting this information from a health education curriculum. And so, yeah, for me, it's bigger than just lack of access to products. It's lack of education and the shame and stigma that goes along with that. So, like when I've developed curricula for puberty education for schools, I always want it taught with all of the students together, not separating out children by what the faculty and staff perceive their gender identity to be. So that everyone is learning about menstruation, so that however someone identifies, maybe they don't menstruate, but they can help a friend or a partner or someone who is someone who menstruates.
So there are a couple. I think one that we work on a lot at our center is this idea that only women menstruate. I know Arissa talked about this a little bit, but just our terminology, and I don't think most people who use this terminology or say women are doing anything to be vicious or hurt others, but I know that especially for our students, they feel left out of that conversation sometimes if they are non-binary or trans or gender diverse in any way. They feel like, well, does this apply to me then? Right, and then just our language saying like feminine hygiene products, and I think the language too that we use thinking about the shame aspect. So I encourage all of you to think back, if you do have a period, to your first period. How did you feel? Just throw out some words. Scared. Alone. Painful. And a lot of us who menstruate go through that alone, right? Because we have that shame that Dr. Cole was speaking about, right? There's such this stigma. And so much what we do at our center is to have us to have a discourse about our bodies. We don't have any space where we talk about our bodies in this society in any healthy ways, either silence or like Pornhub. there's nothing else, right, to talk about bodies. And so we have people of every gender who really don't understand their bodies or others' bodies, and so we don't have this space. That's why I'm so grateful for everyone who organized this to even talk about this. And a few people I told about this to were like, what does that mean? Like that everybody bleeds equally? I'm like, no, okay. So just that we can even have these conversations, right? So we have to be able to create that space.
Kind of interesting that you said, does everybody bleed equally? That was gonna be what the misconception I was gonna talk about was, is that I spend a lot of time talking to patients about, what's normal and what's not normal, right? And I think that one of the biggest misconceptions is that there's a lot of, again, because there's not very much education and not very much knowledge that, well, everybody just suffers, right? Like that's just, you're having a period, you're menstruating, like cramps so bad that you throw up, that's just normal, right? Like that, everybody goes through that. Or bleeding so heavy that we're like soaking through our clothes and having to store extra clothes in our locker at school because that's how much we bleed. That's just normal, right? And so it's always heartening to me to see whenever patients are coming in because their parents are like, I feel like something's not right. But then it always makes me worry about like how many kiddos are out there that just nobody is helping because, you know, the conception out there is that like, you know, if everybody in their family has really terrible heavy periods or really terrible painful cramps, that's just, we all just suffer with it and we just kind of deal with it and move on. And once a month we can't participate in things and go to school or, you know, do our after school things because that's just the way it is when you menstruate, right? So.
For my work, I think there's a lot of misconceptions in what's happening, depending on what state you're in, but some of the things that I hear a lot of the times from legislators on the tax stuff is, oh, we're taxing that? It's like, yes, you are, and then they look at it and they're like, oh, well, actually it brings in some money, so we can't get rid of that. But there's also this misconception for people who are incarcerated that products are freely available. That's one of the things that they've really been looking a lot into. In most states, products are not freely available in prisons and in you know, city jails, anywhere that people are incarcerated. There are not products there that are freely available. They have to be paid for, and so that's a huge issue. The other thing on the legislator side is that I think a lot of people make the assumption that this isn't happening in their state. This isn't happening. It couldn't be happening here. Yeah, it happens in India, you know, it happens in other countries, but it can't be happening here in the US, and it can't be happening here in Oklahoma. And so, you know, what I try to do is to encourage advocates to start the conversation. And I think for advocates, there's a lot of misconceptions on what that might look like. And I think there's a lot of assumptions made on who will listen. And so what I always try to do is encourage advocates to speak to everybody. There are gonna be some jerks who will just, you know, not pay attention or not listen to you, but there are gonna be people who are gonna say, I have a daughter and I care about this issue and I know what they've been through. And so I think for both sides, for advocates and for legislators, the one thing I try to preach is to not make assumptions and to come prepared with facts and figures and let them know this is what's happening here in Oklahoma and this is how we can change this.
Thank you. It's hard to bypass the meme that I see where a man tells his girlfriend, you're on your period, just tell it to stop. Yeah, there's a lot of misconceptions out there. So moving on. Let's talk about barriers. There are a lot of barriers in place for the work that we do, and it's evident that we're all going to face different barriers. So what are specific barriers that you have faced in menstrual equity? And Lacey, I'm going to have you start this one.
You know, for what we see at the national level, obviously income, access, resources, but also people aren't speaking up, just like I said, and that's a huge barrier. There's a lot of shame and there's a lot of stigma. There's a lot of, you know, fear in having the conversation. And I think particularly for students who are using socks instead of period products or wads of toilet paper because they don't have the products that they need. And so I think, you know, one of the barriers is the shame and the stigma that still exists in this country around this conversation. And so that's a big piece of this. On the policy side, I think another barrier is that the political conversations right now are on things that don't matter. And we're forgetting about what truly matters and how we can help people. And so, you know, we're banning books, but we're not putting period products in schools. And that's an issue, and that's a huge barrier. If those conversations are taking over our state houses, how can we get our voice in there? How can we be louder? And so I think that's the biggest barrier we're seeing right now, is that the focus is elsewhere, and it needs to be brought to a bigger light, and more awareness needs to be there.
I would say from the medicine side of things, one of the big barriers is just from also an education standpoint, but even an education standpoint at the level of the physicians that I work with. I do a lot of work teaching medical students and residents who are at different stages of their training on their road to becoming a physician, because frontline, physicians, our primary care providers, our pediatricians, our family medicine doctors, that sort of thing. And if they don't have a basic understanding of like what's not normal with a period, then how are they gonna like be able to then either help treat or talk to a patient about like, this isn't right and something needs to be done. Especially like, again, for our providers that are taking care of our youth and adolescents who are just starting out on their menstruating journey. Again, because like the parents don't have a lot of education. They're like, well, this is how I always had my period. And then the pediatrician is like, well, I don't know anything about periods. That seems like it's probably okay. And then like, again, we're just like back to, I'm just gonna suffer in silence. And anytime I ask a question about this, it's dismissed, right? And so a lot of just like education and knowledge, not just for like the people who menstruate, but for the people who take care of the people that menstruate, right? It's like multiple orders of magnitude there, so that everybody can have this awareness of like, this is a huge quality of life factor, right? And it goes straight from like when we start menstruating all the way through our reproductive years where we continue menstruating, because this impacts people's ability to go to school, but then as we get older to be able to go to work, right? And so just having that understanding and knowledge of like, it's okay to like be able to talk to your doctor about this, but then my job is to make sure your doctor is able to go like, okay, yes, you can talk to me about this and I'm comfortable talking about it, right? I'm not gonna make it weird and awkward. And this like 12-year-old is like asking about their periods, right? And be able to like start trying to make some progress with just normalizing the conversation about like, sometimes periods suck. Like, like they shouldn't, right? It shouldn't be that bad. And so I try to like really advocate for my patients and let them know like every day of the month, if it's a day on your period or a day not on your period, it should just be the same. It's just some days you need period products and that should be the only difference, right? Like you should still be able to do all your normal activities and function and like get out of bed, not be embarrassed that you're gonna have an accident at school, that sort of thing. And so that's kind of a lot of the work that I feel like is a pretty big barrier.
Those are both awesome answers, and I'm gonna take it a little different direction. I think every activist I know is completely exhausted. Like, I think a big barrier is that the world is burning and we have so many different things we're focusing on, and there are so many things going wrong, and there are so many things that we want to address and have to address, and so many immediate needs. And I know so many activists who are completely, absolutely emotionally exhausted from all the emotional labor of having to, what feels like, beat your head against the wall. Anybody feel like that with me in this room? Yes. It's like it's like that whack-a-mole thing. We're like, oh no, okay, we gotta take care of this. We can't get period products. Like there are just so many things going on. And so it's hard to get people right now to, I wouldn't say show up, but they're just so scattered, right? We're so scattered in everything that we're trying to do. So I think that's one big part of it. Another, I think, is just apathy. When you go to these institutions and you try and talk to people and they just don't give a shit. And that can be of any gender, right? And so with our 40 like things that we have on campus that give out free pads and tampons, depending on who has been in charge of those things, that's how we get them filled, right? So who really cares about getting that done and who that matters to. So it also depends on who you're speaking to. So a great barrier is, does this person have apathy towards the subject, or are they going to actually listen, and how are you going to make them listen and hear you? And I don't know the answers for that, but we just keep trying with persistence, and I can't tell you how many emails I've sent over and over and calls I've made, and I know you all can relate to that as well. Yeah.
I love all of these answers and can attest to all of them as well, especially Lacey with having the public health background. I always am looking at policy, legislation, and kind of trying to keep my finger on the pulse of what's going on around the country and how likely is that to come here. So I've been watching Florida and their current push to end any sort of puberty education prior to 5th grade. And then I'm thinking about the people who start menstruating prior to 5th grade. Hopefully they're getting it in their homes, but teaching adults I still consistently hear the story of how they were terrified when they got their period because they thought they were dying because they had no idea what a period was. So the world is burning, and I'm watching all of the legislation being introduced around the country around puberty education, sex education, menstruation education, of course, everything to do with banning books and our BGLTQ plus, youth, and I'm exhausted and I'm terrified, but yet slightly hopeful because I really feel like I think the youth of this country will save us because I see a lot of hope in them, and I see that they're tired of what they're hearing that they can and can't read, and how they should identify their gender, and not having access to resources, education, etc. So while I'm exhausted and at times just want to let it all burn, I'm really hopeful when I look at the future. And I have children, I have a teenager. I think it's super awesome that when his girlfriend came over and happened to be menstruating and didn't have products, she was like, hey, can you ask your mom if she's got anything? Because I think back, I'm almost 48, I think that I would have never done that as a 16-year-old girl. So I'm really hopeful and exhausted.
Yeah. That's really good stuff. So our period poverty program started 2.5 years ago when 2 teachers at Del City High School noticed that students were missing on average 2 to 3 days per month because they didn't have access to period products. What those 2 teachers started, thankfully the foundation was able to step in and we were able to grow that. Things start small, so with one action can lead to big actions. Mm-hmm. So let's take a few minutes. Tell me what actions are your organization taking? What's a win that you have right now? And then what are ways that we can get involved to help take more steps?
I'll start somewhere in the middle or start here again. Okay, start with sugar.
Oh, there's so many things. I like this question. So some of the things that we do, as we've talked about, are we have these period products available and we talk about them with that gender inclusive language. So people from all over campus, the community, can come into our center and feel like they can get these products without shame. As I said, we keep saying we're a shame-free space, we're a shame-free space, and we repeat that over and over again because in Oklahoma, and as we're talking about around the country with the world burning, there's so much shame. So to create that shame-free space, we also have an event that we call Menstruation Conversations, where we have a panel like this, but we also celebrate periods in the sense that we give out little buttons that say menstruator, and they're really cute, and they have a uterus with flowers on them, and to make this something that we can actually, discuss and see from different perspectives. So I teach a course called History of the Divine Feminine, and we talk about sacred menstruation, that in different cultures, menstruation isn't always considered dirty and disgusting. We have to change the discussion and see that we have one cultural lens, but there are so many different ways that we can talk about menstruation. And I think that's something that we try and do at our center. And it really gets people offended. I think there was this really interesting campaign. I don't remember what college it was at, but it had it was like a picture of a pad with menstrual blood on it, and it said, if this offends you more than sexual assault, maybe you should ask yourself some questions. So when we do these events, people are really frightened of them in the sense because, like we talked about earlier, there's not that space to have these conversations. So I think us making a space for these conversations in a healthy, productive way, and also to see that it's not always just let's talk about it from a miserable aspect, that there are other ways we can see this and celebrate this. But I know we've talked a lot about, because periods can suck, but also that there are, cultures that may see periods in different ways as well. Yeah.
I love this. So the Alliance for Period Supplies is constantly working to build out more resources so that individuals have some power and have those stats and facts and figures that I said to come prepared to have those conversations. And so, one thing that we did last year, actually in May of last year during Period Poverty Awareness Week, which is coming up, was launch our first ever policy web pages that show which states have passed legislation related to putting period products in schools, but also, and that was in collaboration with PeriodOKC, so I know some of you probably work with them as well. And then also on the tampon tax is what we call it on our page. And so that's, those resources are there to help you have that conversation, to say to your elected officials that why are these other states around us doing stuff, but we're not, which is very hard in Oklahoma because the other states around you really aren't doing that much. But when Texas passes their bill, that's going to pass probably next week or the week after to exempt products from sales tax. That's something you can say, look right below us, what are they doing? But also, looking at period products in schools, there are 21 states now that have passed some legislation to put products into schools. And every state, I will say, is very different. It's different on, what bathrooms, that was a really great point in your presentation, of what bathrooms they're putting them in. Is it a gender inclusive bill? How much money is going towards it, or is it on the schools? And so the Alliance for Period Supplies supports legislation that is fully funded legislation by the state to put products into schools and to require that schools provide the products so that people have them. And so one of the things that we did this year is also create a model bill for legislation to help advocates like you say, this is what this could look like. And you could completely change some of the things in there, but it's gender inclusive and it provides a good layout based on what we've seen across the country to hand off. But we also collect statistics from our member programs throughout the country that show how many products are being distributed by them, but also what are the state statistics on period poverty? What does this look like in your state, so that you can have that information. And so all this to say, I'm working on this so that you can work on having those conversations here. And to bring this to your elected officials, to bring this to your school boards, to your schools if you're a student, to say, look, we can do this too. And so I think a lot of what we talked about today is shame and stigma. And one thing I like today is get over it. We're here to talk about it. Let's forget about that and let's have the conversation. Let's make some people uncomfortable while we're doing it, because there's a lot of other things that are making us uncomfortable. So let's throw that back at them and let's talk about periods. So that's what I encourage you all to do, is to advocate for this change, because it's only going to happen if a collective speaks. And look at us all here today. We are a collective, and I live in Louisiana, so it's not going to matter if I speak on it. But if you all speak on it together, it's going to make a difference.
This question is a little harder for me to answer, which is why I skipped to you, because I'm not representing an organization, right? I'm just an individual. But I would say to encourage the others of you out there that are also individuals and not part of an organization, that you can also be advocates, right? And so just encouraging people to take the empowerment, take the knowledge, take the just kind of community that we're experiencing here today, and kind of pay it forward, right? To try to get involved and try to get more into the advocacy realm, because again, we are so burnt out, right? We're so exhausted. It's like, man, there's so many things, like how can I make a difference, right? And so, right, me as an individual, I'm like, I feel like I'm sitting up here and I'm like, what am I doing up here on this panel? But, my background is just very different, and we all come from different places, right? And we all come together because we all care about this.
Can I just say one thing?
Yeah, go ahead.
What I was saying to Lisa before we started is that gynecologists have been really, really, really great advocates in this space. So you are here for a reason, and you have the potential to very well lead this conversation. There's a huge group of gynecologists in Nebraska who are leading this discussion in their state. So there's a lot of opportunities, and there's a huge reason you're here.
mean, I found it exciting when you introduced yourself to mention that you focus on adolescent gynecology, because most people think, oh, I don't have to go to a gynecologist till I'm an adult and maybe thinking about having babies or something, or there's a problem. So I love that you focus on a population that I think oftentimes people go, oh yeah, you just see your pediatrician or your GP or something else. So to just piggyback on what everyone has already shared, and I'm also an individual, I wear a lot of hats, but I don't really feel like I belong to any one of those organizations that I'm involved with. I think advocacy is where it's at, and you know, it's going whenever your legislators or people who are running for office are having some sort of event. It's talking to them, it's getting their ear, talk to them about eliminating tax on menstrual products. I'm from Michigan, so I find it, the fact that we tax groceries, I'm like, what? What? That's a necessity, that's not a luxury. So that was very surprising when I moved here almost 15 years ago. But you know, we should write our legislators and talk to those running for office about eliminating tax on menstrual products, subsidizing cups and underwear that are reusable. I know the underwear is being studied, but still subsidizing cups and underwear that are reusable, talking about free products in schools and federal buildings, writing your legislators. There's even at the federal level, there was a Menstrual Equity for All Act that was introduced in 2019 by Rep. Greg Meng, and it never went up for a vote. So, you know, letting people know who are introducing this legislation, you talk about all the bills that sort of die on the floor, reaching out and supporting them so that they continue with the work. I imagine that it's hard to keep putting forth a bill if it never, you know, gets voted on or, you know, dies in some sort of committee somewhere. But tell them that you appreciate the work that they're doing, that you see them and that you support them so that they might be more inclined to keep reintroducing that kind of legislation. If you want to get involved more globally, like I mentioned, my husband and I, we work with some nonprofits here that then partner with nonprofits in Liberia. So there's Dignity Liberia, there's Global Giving, the Gabawi Peace Foundation is an Africa USA collaboration, and there are others that you can find. You know, maybe your family comes from a different region of the world and you'd like to focus your efforts there. There are so many opportunities to get involved on the teeny tiny micro level, like going back to all of your employers and saying, hey, we need these products in all of our restrooms, not just, you know, restrooms that you perceive are being used by people who menstruate. Let's put them in all the restrooms. You know, going to your school principal or anyone and saying, hey, we should have these products. I know where my kids go to school, the school librarian was the person who initiated getting all those products on campus and has been instrumental in getting books on the shelves. Fortunately, my children can read lots of banned books because they go to private schools. And she is awesome about getting books on the shelves about menstruation and puberty and all the things that is now being banned in Florida, and I'm sure we'll follow suit.
I realized I didn't say what you could do to help because I got so excited for the first part of the question. Yeah. So one thing I always say is where you put your time, you know, shows what you value. So all of you being here today, I just want to thank all of you for being here and taking that time. Like we said, there's so many other things going on, but you being here today shows what you value. So specifically for our center, if there's anything you ever want to do to help, we always need pads and tampons, but cups, when you said that, it reminded me. We have had people donate cups and they go within 1 to 2 days. And I'm talking about donating 20, 30 at a time. So if you ever want to do a drive like that, we appreciate it so much. So many of our students have to use our food pantry. We assume just because they're in college that they would be able to afford these things. That's not necessarily true. So if you ever want to help with us in any way at UCO, just, let me know. And I don't know how we can get our information out there, but we would love to have that help and support, yeah.
We'll share it.
Okay, all right, thank you.
We'll share everyone's information.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's exciting to hear the work that's being done, and it's always nice to hear ways that we can attribute as well. So thank you for your answers. I'm going to give a shameless plug for PeriodOKC because they were instrumental in helping us get our program launched. If you're looking for something to get involved with, or even use them as a connector piece, they help connect us to other organizations. Our program wouldn't have happened without the community that we're in. There were a lot of moving pieces that kind of miraculously came together at the right place at the right time. That doesn't mean it can't happen again. It can happen several times. So reach out to PeriodOKC, get connected with somebody there, and they can help you take action steps, whether they're little or big. So we still have lots of time left. I'm gonna go a little rogue, if that's okay with you guys. Would you be comfortable we open up for questions? Okay, yeah.
This question is for Lacey, and this is about incarcerated women, especially given the fact in Oklahoma that American Indian women represent the highest percentage of incarceration. And we want to help these women, but how can we ensure that these women are getting those products when we take them to these rural county jails or these different things like that? Like, how can we guarantee that our menstruators actually have those access to them? Because once we give it, we just don't know.
Yeah, unfortunately answer to that question, but it's something that I have heard. We work with some programs that work just in prisons and jails and bringing products there, but they have the same questions. And, I think they drop it off and they do it in good faith, but they don't know, what are those products being sold? Are they getting to them? Are they going in the employee restrooms? They don't know, but they're doing it in good faith, hoping that they're gonna get there. I think the best way that I know how is to put it in legislation that the state should be providing those products free of charge. There's no reason that somebody should have to pay for that with their commissary money. That doesn't make any sense. And so I think advocating for that's another thing, another misconception that I hear all the time is that people think these products are free in prisons and jails. And I think even a lot of our legislators think that's the case. And so it's a large area where the awareness is not there. And I think the thing is that the schools is where a lot of attention is right now, but the conversation has to be had there as well. And I think, if you as somebody who's doing this work and is providing those products and you have these questions, if you can speak to that with your elected officials and make them aware that this is an issue, that you are having to do this, and that in and of itself is a huge thing. So again, it comes back to that awareness piece, those misconceptions about what's happening, what's not happening, and just really let them know what you're doing and what's not happening behind the scenes.
I mentioned earlier we did that research, and it was a very small sample size of people in prison and how many products they received. And it seems like in Oklahoma County they are doled out a certain amount. And when they asked for more, from what we received from the feedback, is they were told that they're just wanting to use them for fun or for sex toys or for whatever else. And so there's only a certain amount they're allowed to get, even if they're bleeding through on their bed. And you might with Remerge, this is where we did the study. So they can bleed through on their bed and they're told, you're given 7 pads, this cycle. And, you're just trying to use them for all these other reasons, as if it's like something they're using for fun, right? So they're, yeah. And I
Sorry.
That's what you can
Is
use
that
in
okay?
the
Can I break the rules for just a second?
Yeah.
PeriodOKC. Yeah?
There
Can
are
I
no
present?
rules.
The Oklahoma County Detention Center is a community partner of PeriodOKC, and so they're fighting internally. There's actually one gentleman who is the chaplain there, and he reached out to us to receive menstrual products because he saw the lack of access and just complete inhumane conditions that the women specifically were facing when it came to their menstrual cycles. And so he requested we donate to them monthly, and so he's fighting from within to increase the amount of products they get each month, because without having enough products, it creates kind of a barter system, and it can really lead to other problems escalating. And so there is, in positive news, the Oklahoma County Detention Center, they're working hard to increase the amount of products. Their budget is terrible because it's a jail, and but because of organizations like us or other places, they're able to have more. They get about 3,000 products a month, I think.
I was just going to make a suggestion that while we work on advocacy and legislation to form relationships with people in the detention centers, jails, prisons, so that it feels more personal to them and they understand the work that you're doing and the importance of it, so that they might be that person on the inside who says, no, we're not going to put these, in the comments where you're selling them. These are to be distributed for free. Yeah.
Sorry to keep the prison and period, but so I'm from Alabama, where there is a law that you have to have products in prisons and jails. But during COVID, I was asked, I used to run a charity project for some donations by a chaplain at our city jail, saying they're not selling them to people and they don't have any to give for free, so women are just bleeding out on themselves. And I didn't realize at the time that that was a legislation that was passed in Alabama. So as somebody that doesn't have like a direct access to legislators or even know how this works, to hold people accountable when this is legislation, but because no one's checking it, they don't have to do it. What is the steps to say this is happening, this is supposed to not be happening? Who do you talk to? What is kind of like the hierarchy? Like, who do you need to contact to report this stuff? Because I can tell you that the warden at that jail did not want to talk to me.
I had tried to donate to Rogers County Jail, and they wouldn't let me donate tampons because they said it would be a barter tool or a weapon.
You can't donate tampons.
Yeah.
It's a class 2 medical device or something. There's some strict rules on donating tampons. But for your situation, implementation is the trickiest part of legislation. And that's something that I've noticed in the school side of things too, is what's actually happening in some states that have passed legislation. So it's one thing to do something, but it's another thing to stay on top of people and to hold them accountable. Whatever committee passed that legislation in Alabama is the one who's gonna want the information of what's happening with the bill they passed. And so every legislative session, you can bring this to their attention. You can send them email after email after email and pound that email box of that committee to say, this isn't happening. You passed this bill, but it's not happening. Because they actually will have a serious issue if something isn't happening and their committee passed it. I was just in a committee this week, actually, that they were talking about this very thing. And they're like, oh, we passed that. We want to make sure it's happening. But there's also, depending on the state and system, there is usually like an overarching board that you can bring it to. I don't know what that is like in Alabama. Every state is so different, but I would look into that, like who oversees all of the prisons and jails. And there's a department as well, so you can bring that to the attention of the department. So looking into all the people who are responsible for checking those mandates and bringing it back to the legislature, because even when something's done, if it's not done properly, they're gonna wanna hear about it. Just check into all of those resources and then start sending off emails and complaining, like, a little bit of a Karen, but necessary.
I think there's also, like, if you would reach out to the they weren't the right people to do this, they would find the right people to do this. And so they have chapters everywhere. There's also a group called Period Law. They speak period equity, now they're Period Law. And they may also not be the exact right people, but like, when I started the coalition in Oklahoma, they were one of the first people I reached out to, and their founder called me on the phone 2 days later to have a conversation. And so like, they're very accessible
works.
Yeah.
I think too, just to add a little bit, investigative journalists can be really helpful if things are not, you've tried all of this and nothing's happening. There are some really good ones here in Oklahoma.
Yeah.
It's a last ditch effort, but they're very good at figuring that kind of stuff out too, and also they have a platform to talk about it if, you know, still not getting responsiveness from the
Let's take
system.
one more question. Yeah.
It's Debbie, and so I'm a physician and epidemiologist. So my most recent work is in women's health, specifically thyroid, endometriosis, infertility, and so working as a scientist in that field, the reason why this conversation, I think what I was is more like a comment, it's very needed, is that the conversation around period is very shame-based, and you will be amazed at how a lot of women are suffering in silence and don't even know what their normal bodily function should look like. So I don't know what Lisa is talking about, but she's well qualified to be here. Yeah. And so I need you to own your power and own your space, because a lot of the work that I was doing was talking to OB-GYN like you day and night, or nurse practitioners in women's health, because you are often the first call of people, and you are in a very critical demographic, which is adolescents. Like a lot of women who have endometriosis, for example, start having changes in their cycle as teenagers, right? You asked a question earlier as to when you got your first period, what was your, my mother didn't tell me nothing, I'm African. They don't even talk about this. It's almost like a taboo. I don't know why. And so when I started having very heavy periods in my early 20s and painful cramps that I would almost want to pass out, I just thought it was normal. My friends didn't talk about it, nobody talked about it, and I didn't even know the different options of like, period, all the things we're talking about today. So it's very shame-based, and I think this is a good platform. That's why I came, because I was interested. Like, what are we talking about is that we want to normalize this conversation to create a safe space so that women can talk about, what does a normal period look like? And going back to the convener of this summit is when we are creating, like public health, like that education of this is what you need and this is what you use. Are there avenues to kind of point teenagers and young women, or whatever they identify as, into the right direction if, for example, they are bleeding out? Because, for example, you should not be bleeding out, on a normal cycle. And so imagine if they are suffering in silence and they don't even have the resources to take care of that. They already feel like they're burdened. And so how can we create more spaces to have this conversation and then deal with the irregularities in their period? I'm just curious if we have any resources for that.
I'm always going to go back
What was the
to.
end of that question? What was the end of that question? The resources for?
Yeah, the resources to deal with those kind of problems, if I would, in our community, for like young women and teenagers, to just kind of help them understand this is what a regular period looks like, and if they know that if there is an abnormality, then they know where to go instead of suffering in silence.
Yeah. I think, you bring up an interesting point, because I joke a lot that like my field is kind of in this like space between pediatrics and OBGYN, where pediatricians generally do not feel comfortable talking about anything down there, and the OBGYNs really don't feel comfortable taking care of young people, right? And so there's this kind of like this overlap where there's this void in the middle, where like there's just like nobody comfortable, like kind of talking to young people about like puberty and periods and like how do we manage that, and so that's a part of the reason why the field that I'm in kind of came to be, was because there was like a small group of people who were like, somebody needs to take care of like this. And so it's not a very big field. I'm actually the only one who does this in the entire state of Oklahoma, and that's true for a lot of states in the country. And there's also states that have nobody that does what I do, and so there's just not very many. It's a growing field, which is exciting to be a part of a field that is growing and becoming more recognized, and more people are interested in trying to advocate for, you know, kind of this population of people, because there's just not a lot of people, right? It's in this space where people are just like, I don't do that, right? And so I feel like a lot of what I do is when I'm seeing patients, like I feel grateful when they get referred to me, because then I'm able to, and I tell pediatricians all the time, I'm like, you don't, like, you just send them to me, I will spend the entire visit just talking to them about their period, because I have that luxury. Like, you can worry about their shot schedule and how well they're growing and all of these things, and I'll talk to them about their periods. And so, like, I get these patients where I'm like, they haven't even started administrating yet, they're starting the puberty process, and I'm like, I have a handout, I'm like, here is what's normal, what's not normal. If you, like, are having something that's bothersome with your periods, like, come back and talk to me about it. Like, this is a safe place to kind of go through those things and make sure that you're, so there's like, and that's, so my national, like, kind of physician group is the North American Society for Pediatric and Adolescent Gynecology. And on their website, so that's NASPAG, N-A-S-P-A-G, naspag.org, they have a whole section of just patient handouts, and there's like, that's freely accessible, right? You just go to their website, it's freely accessible, you can print it off from their website, and that is all one page, very simple, basic, you know, kind of education handout about different period problems. They have pages, like a page on, again, normal and not normal periods. They have a page on painful periods, heavy periods, right? You know, talking about different, you know, types of medications that we might use to treat periods, all of those sorts of things. And so just knowing that, like, you know, those, that, I mean, that's stuff that I give out to my patients every single day, right? I just have like a whole like file folder drawer of like all of my printouts, so I can just like hand them out like candy, like, here you go, more information for everybody, right? And so just, you know, it's a lot of just that kind of education and outreach, yeah.
Lisa, can you say that website?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Pull it up.
Oh, there it is.
Yay. Thank you.
Doing the computer. So that's like the main web page, and then at the top, that top, sorry, kind of middle blue bar, yes, just naspag.org. That kind of middle blue bar that says patient resources all the way kind of towards the right, there you go, and it says patient handouts, you just click on that. And they're translated into a couple of different languages as well, but you can see these are all just like freely accessible information handouts about a whole variety of different conditions. There you go. There's one on like hygiene, right? Like vulvar hygiene. It's amazing to me how many times I'm just teaching patients about this is how you clean down there, right? Because that's, again, just not something that is talked about, right? And we just assume that their parents are going to teach them, but it's not necessarily something that all parents are comfortable teaching or that they even know themselves, right? And so it's, yeah, frequently missed.
I just have like one final thought around this question is, you know, one is when we're looking at proposed legislation, you really want to read through it and have an understanding of it. And if you don't quite understand it, ask the organizations that are leading in those areas to say, does this look like a good bill? Because for a decade or more in the state of Oklahoma, there were bills being proposed for for health education, but they were unfunded mandates. So what that says is, we're gonna pass legislation that we have health education in Oklahoma, but as soon as the school system says, well, we don't have the funding for that, they go, sorry, it's okay then, you don't have to teach that. So you want any sort of, you know, legislation or mandates to get period products for free and, you know, our criminal justice system, or you want them to be funded. You want to see that there are tax dollars somehow being allocated to this. Otherwise, they pass legislation, there's no funding of it, and it doesn't happen. So you want to make certain that you understand it. In the meantime, there's something that we do in health education and in public health with lay health educators and community health workers, where people don't have to have necessarily a degree or a background in it, but you might be going into barber shops and beauty shops, and you know, you're talking to pastors about how they can have pamphlets, have information, have a little bit of knowledge that you've shared with them that then they can share with their clients. Maybe it's the librarian at the school, or if you don't have a school nurse or a health educator. It'll be interesting to see how they do implement health ed in our schools. A lot of PE teachers do have a health ed minor maybe, but since we've never had health ed in Oklahoma, I imagine that it's going to be dumped on educators in the school system that don't have a background in health ed, right? Like everyone thinks, well, health is nothing. I can read about cardiovascular health and I'm gonna go teach it. But it's nuanced, right? There's a complete skill set that a health educator should have, and I imagine that this health ed that shows up in the fall is going to be piecemealed together and taught by people who are probably not qualified to teach it.
More comfortable.
So yeah, we're comfortable, right? I mean, a lot of people, even at QCO, we have our Healthy Life Skills class, and I would get called in to teach for all these different people. They would teach about diabetes and cardiovascular disease and nutrition and physical activity. They'd be like, Dr. Cole, can you come and teach my 1 or 2 classes on sex? And I'm like, yeah. I would rather teach it than have someone fumble through it who is uncomfortable doing so, or they're going to give misinformation. Stuff that's not scientifically or medically accurate. It's not trauma-informed, it's not inclusive, yada, yada, yada. So yeah, I will go to every single class that you invite me to, and in fact, they videotape some of the classrooms that I've done so they can show it in all the other classrooms. It's mind-boggling, but yeah, so just pay attention to the legislation, how it's written. If you're unsure, ask these organizations, what do you think about it? Is your agency supporting this? Judges that are, and any politician, a judge, anything. I go to Remerge, I'm like, what do you think about this? What do you think about that judge? Should we keep this one in office? Ask the people who are directly impacted by it, what is your understanding of it, and how do you think you'll vote on this? And then, like I said, maybe we need to do better in the meantime of just training people, boots on the ground, wherever they are. A lot of people are our allies, even if they don't know exactly what to say or how to do it, but we can train them.
Yeah. Well, and I would like to close things by saying, since we got included in or involved in this conversation, the biggest response that I've had hasn't been apathy, it's been a flat out lack of awareness. Yeah. I've had men and women come to me and say, I had no idea. And I include myself in that because before I found out what our teachers were doing, I had no idea this was a problem. I had no idea we had students that didn't have access to period products. So the conversation that we're holding today, it's important and it's vital. And what you can do today is go home and call your friend or text your friend or tweet or whatever social media platform. But having these conversations is how we start the ripple effect that can lead to lasting change. So thank you to all of our panelists. The food smells delicious, so I'm gonna stop talking.
Yeah.
Thank you all for your expertise in sharing with us today, and thank you for all your great questions.
Can I add something? I just want to.
And we received, actually that's the way how I found out about this, because someone came to advocate to our office. And I just want to say that if you want to get more involved, please just go to a website, okhouse.gov, and there you can track the bills that you're interested in. You can put your address and find who is your representative, and then if you call them, you're gonna, maybe someone like me, and a legislative assistant is gonna answer, and then we have, our duty is just to pass the information to your representative. You can meet with them, you can come to the office and advocate, but they have to listen to you because you are their constituent. So yeah, okhouse.gov.
We should get a picture of the three of us. That has access to the drive.